Hey Squishies, back again with another vlog. This is 7 Deadly Sins, episode 5, I want to say? And I've totally forgotten what the title was. So, this episode had almost no Diane in it, and therefore is terrible. Okay, that's the vlog. Good night, everybody. Now, so the main, I think, reveal in this episode is that Meliodas has a, well, darker side, because he's kind of terrible to begin with. But then he has this other side that's terrible in a completely different way. Like, terrifying murder fiend. As opposed to, you know, sex fiend. Yay? I mean, and it's somehow connected with people trying to take the sword. We also got a brief flashback of him with someone who seemed dead. A woman with red hair, I think, who, to my eyes at least, vaguely resembled the bad guy with the lightning powers. Don't know if that's just similarity of design or if there's some kind of connection between them, but, you know, that is how it appeared to me. Other than that, you know, it continues to frustrate me that there is really no one to root for in this show. Every character, except that, you know, even Diane, really, every character is basically the worst. Like, the villains are all over-the-top villainous. Meliodas is constantly sexually assaulting Elizabeth. Elizabeth is naive and oblivious. Hawk just tags along and lets Meliodas do whatever he wants. And Diane, like, practically worships the ground Meliodas walks on. So, like, even though Diane is probably the best of them, I want the character who will tell Meliodas to quit his bullshit. That's the character I would root for. You know, an actual good guy. And I'm not saying that a show has to have good guys. I mean, I do enjoy Game of Thrones, in which every single character is a completely terrible person. But my problem is that the show doesn't seem to realize that Meliodas is a terrible person. It sees him as quirky. And the characters around him respond to it as if it's a quirk. And so the show just blithely proceeds on. You know, and it's everyone. Like, Bond seemed pretty cool last episode, but this episode, like, we find out that he stripped a woman naked and left her to be found by a bunch of soldiers. Well, mostly naked. While, you know, mockingly telling her that her armor was too manly for her. Like, that's some bullshit right there. So he's on my shit list too now. And it's like, there are characters who are terrible people in other things that I root for because they've got some style about it, you know? The one that's immediately popping into my head is Zealous from the Slayers, who is a literal demon that literally feeds on the suffering of others, but he has so much fun with it that you can't help but enjoy him. I guess that's a better way to put it, enjoying someone rather than rooting for them, because you're never really rooting for Zealous, but he's enjoyable. These characters basically aren't. Like, there was some neat stuff in the fight scene between Diane and Meliodas, but I wasn't invested in it at all. It wasn't like, oh, these two characters I like, these two characters I enjoy are fighting each other, and that creates a tension. Because, in like a heroic fantasy type thing, the good guys are going to win, the bad guys are going to lose eventually. Whoever is framed as good guys and bad guys by the show. But if you enjoy both characters, then there's still some tension to their fight, because you don't want to see the character that you enjoy, either character that you enjoy, being taken out of the picture. But a fight between two characters that I basically don't enjoy, like, what do I care? It's just two characters fighting. There's some nice animation in there, but I'm not invested in it. Magic Bell is turning these terrible people onto each other. Like, that seems excessive effort. Just have them be terrible at each other. God. I really want Elizabeth to just smack the shit out of Meliodas, take his sword, and save the kingdom on her own, Like, they teased me with it again in this episode. She says, like, if he had died, she would have carried on to save the kingdom. Like, I want to see that show. Because at least then I might start enjoying her. But her being this, like, naive, oblivious foil to Meliodas' bullshit, she's completely unenjoyable. She's barely even a character. I've seen stuff that has main characters who are kind of lecherous and is still enjoyable. Irresponsible Captain Tyler comes immediately to mind. That show's amazing. But it's because his behavior is depicted as, well, irresponsible. It's part of the whole premise of the show is you can never quite tell if Tyler is a terrible captain who's really lucky or an amazing captain who's good at playing the fool. But it's both. And his, behavior towards female crew members is depicted as part of him being terrible. Even when it's played for laughs, it's still, the laughs are at his expense. It's, haha, look at the incongruence of this terrible person being, lauded as a hero. And that's not really doesn't really feel like what's going on with Meliodas. Because another major difference is Tyler really never gets away with it. Meliodas does every single time. I can't remember if I've talked about this in a previous vlog, but I know I've talked about it in posts and stuff like that, but the benign violation theory of humor, which is the one that, it's one that has some solid scientific support, and it's one that I think makes the most sense. It holds that something is funny when it both violates our sense of how things should be and registers as benign, as being not harmful. So, for example, we laugh at slapstick because people aren't supposed to slip on banana peels. But where in real life someone slipping on a banana peel, most of us would probably not laugh, probably rush forward and be like, oh my god, are you okay? But because we know it's staged and fake, it doesn't register as harmful. So we laugh because it's a violation that's funny, or a violation that's harmless and therefore funny. Violations that are not harmless generate feelings of upset or anger or fright, and can therefore be used for other kinds of media. I'd argue that there's a parallel malign violation theory of horror. That horror is based on witnessing violations of how things should work that create a sense of impending harm. And that's why the line between horror and humor is so thin. Because the line between harmless and this is going to harm someone at some point is not a very, huge difference. Anyway, so my issue is that they're trying to, with Tyler, the reason it registered as harmless was because they repeatedly demonstrated that the women could take care of themselves and he wasn't going to get away with it. With this, what they repeatedly demonstrate is that Elizabeth is too oblivious and naive to put up the fuss that she really ought to, even though she clearly doesn't like it. And so in other words, we're being asked, by framing this as funny, they're saying that the only harm we should care about is harm to Meliodas, not harm to Elizabeth. That if his actions upset her, it doesn't matter as long as she doesn't do anything back. In other words, we should only care about the feelings of Meliodas. We shouldn't care about the feelings of Elizabeth. Because that's the only way I can see it being funny. That's the only way I can see it being benign, is if the fact that Elizabeth doesn't like it doesn't register to us as harm. And that's not an okay position to be in. To, when somebody is sexually harassing and assaulting someone else, we should care about the feelings of the person being harassed and assaulted. It worries me that this show, it's not telling you not to, it's expecting you not to. It thinks so poorly of its audience that it thinks that they will not be bothered by that at all. And what worries me is that this show is wildly successful, so they're probably right about much of their audience. That much of their audience does find that funny and hence does not care about what's happening to Elizabeth. Now, you can make a case that it's, the equivalent to slapstick, that, we see that these characters aren't real. We know that they're not real. And so it registers as benign because we know it's fake. But that doesn't actually apply in most forms of humor. It works in slapstick because what happens in slapstick is so over the top that we know it's not real. But, and so over the top that we can't help but see it. That it's so over the top that it just blares at us. This is not real, this is not trying to be real, this is not parallel to anything that could ever happen in real life. Whereas, sexual assault and sexual harassment happen every day. Elizabeth may not be real, but the situation being depicted is. And including, the fact that victims very often don't speak up. Not because they're naive and oblivious, but because they are in a position of relatively less power than the person who's doing it, or because they expect not to be believed, or because society subjects them to negative consequences outside of legal consequences. Certain crimes, reporting them subjects you to social consequences. People might, if people like the person who committed the crime, they might blame the person who reported it. Very often they'll blame the person who reported it anyway, because we have a lot of victim blaming in our society. And that's what makes it feel not benign. It's not that Elizabeth is a real person and we have some kind of obligation to care about her feelings. It's that the situation being depicted calls to mind so many real-life situations that are very much not benign, and suggests that that's something that just don't worry about. And the implication that most of the audience doesn't care about it. That's what's, upsetting is a strong word for how I feel about it. It pisses me off. And it makes me not want to engage with the rest of the story. Because I don't enjoy these characters most of the time. So even if some fight sequences are pretty cool, I am still, this is still a character I don't enjoy. So, yeah, that's about it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Check out my Patreon for early access to videos, blog posts, and more. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!